Hi, I'm Andy Allison, Vice President of Living Collections and Education here at the National Mississippi River Museum and Aquarium. I'm here to talk about our Marshallese connection in our new Rivers to the Sea gallery that opened last year. So a few years ago, the Marshallese community reached out to us. They were interested in whether we would be willing and able to help tell the story of the Marshallese people. The way it was described to us, they said that climate change is not a question for us. In the Marshall Islands, we're seeing the results every day. The waters are rising, our islands are changing to the point that many of us are having to move out of the Marshall Islands. And we're very thankful for places like Dubuque that are welcoming us into their communities. They wanted to know if there was a way that we could help tell their stories, possibly by displaying one of their canoes. At the time, we really didn't have any specific ideas, any specific thoughts on how we could incorporate that into a river museum message. So fast forward a couple of years, and we started to talk about the renovation of our Rivers to the Sea gallery. We wanted to tell a better story, and we wanted to better connect the rivers of America with the rest of the world and talk about connections. And as we're talking about those connections, we were looking for ways to bring the river to places on the far side of the planet. And this Marshallese connection really seemed to fit the bill. That's where we came up with this idea to use the Marshallese story to open as an introduction to the new Rivers to the Sea gallery. Chief Eroge and some of his peers offered to build this canoe behind me here, a canoe that is true to form. So this is a canoe exactly like you would see in the Marshall Islands. This canoe it's not an ocean-going vessel. This is a smaller version because we only had a small space to work with in the River Museum. But this is a smaller version of their canoes that they would use to go on day fishing trips, maybe in the local harbor, in the local coral reefs right off their islands. So they built this canoe, and this is really helping us to compare boats that are used in other parts of the planet. Since this is a river museum, we really do we do talk a lot about the different boats, the canoes, the sailing, the advancement of the outboard motor and things like that. So this gives us a good comparison for boats in other parts of the world. But more importantly, it helps tie it helps tie Dubuque with the rest of the world. Here at the Rivers to the Sea gallery, we have 5 different habitats that we use to compare the rivers of America and connect them to the rest of the world. So we have 5 different habitats. The Marshallese is our opening introductory area, but then we also have the Mississippi River and how it affects the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean Sea. We also have the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence Seaway, which drains into the North Atlantic. And then our 4th zone is the North Pacific and how it is impacted by the Columbia River. And then we've got the Colorado River as it drains into the Gulf of California. And each of those zones is important in different ways. Each one has a different body of water, different water conditions, different water clarity, different types of animals, and different stories. But probably most importantly, each of the aquariums that we showcase in this area, they all represent very specific conservation messages that are very important to help explain why these animals are here. Each of them helps to tell a story, whether it's invasive species or making sustainable seafood choices, or how the oceans are changing in our lifetimes. These are all important stories about how we can make a difference and how we can help keep our oceans and our rivers clean and healthy. Over here we have an aquarium that helps to that showcases some of the species that you might find in the reefs around the Marshall Islands. We've got pallet surgeonfish, raccoon butterfly fish, fox-face rabbit fish, and a lot of different fish that have a lot of colors and significance, and it gives us an opportunity to showcase some of the bright colors and the unique adaptations and different styles of fish that you find in the coral reefs on the other side of the planet. The Gulf of Mexico Aquarium is our biggest aquarium at about 40,000 gallons. This one helps us to talk about things like the oil industry, the pros and cons of the oil industry. There are always risks of oil spills, for example, which would be a big negative, but on the positive, oil platforms create a lot of artificial reef habitat for a lot of fish. The Gulf of Mexico zone has 5 different aquariums and 5 different conservation stories. We start with the coral reef, where we talk about some of the Florida reef tract and the fact that the coral reefs are suffering and being impacted by the changing water conditions. The Seahorse Aquarium helps us to talk about animal propagation and how human-assisted reproduction efforts can have huge impacts on saving species in the wild. Right now, almost all of the seahorses that are in aquariums are actually raised in aquariums. So that helps us to connect it to some of our other conservation stories, like Wyoming toads. Our garden eel habitat helps us to talk about carbon sequestering, which is a fancy way of saying the plants in the seagrass beds help to store carbon and pull some of the carbon out of the environment, which helps to lower the carbon in the atmosphere, which also helps to limit climate changes that are started and impacted by carbon. The lionfish aquarium is a great example of an invasive species. Lionfish were introduced into the Gulf of Mexico about 20 years ago now, and no one is exactly sure how they got there, but it's probably related to aquarium pets that were released, and then those lionfish ended up taking over. And now they're found all the way up and down the Atlantic seaboard, where they never lived in the past, and they don't have any natural predators. So they have caused a lot of problems with the natural diversity in the Gulf of Mexico. The North Atlantic, we do have 2 aquariums that help us to tell stories that are more specific to the Atlantic Ocean. So moon jellies. Moon jellies are just amazing animals. They're so different than any other animal. Their life cycle is amazing. I encourage you to come to the River Museum and learn more about these animals. But the moon jellies help us to talk about things like plastic pollution. If you think about a plastic bag that falls into the water, it drifts around, and it actually looks a lot like a jellyfish and confuses some fish and sea turtles into eating those plastic bags, thinking that they are jellyfish. It also helps us to talk about things like natural biodiversity and the fact that changing conditions will change the relative quantity of animals in the ocean. Some areas, jellyfish numbers are skyrocketing because fish numbers are dropping, and that's creating a natural shift to more jellyfish, less and less fish. So that's something that we can help explain to people. Our next zone is the North Pacific Ocean, as it's impacted by the Columbia River. We have 4 aquariums that are in this zone. The octopus, we have a kelp forest with a pop-up bubble underneath. We have a jetty aquarium, and we have a tide pool touch tank. The octopus aquarium helps us to talk about keystone species. A keystone species is an animal that is so important to its habitat that if that keystone species wasn't there, it would have domino effects. It would have big impacts on the health of that ecosystem, and potentially, if that animal is not there, other animals might also suffer and might also go extinct. So the octopus, as a top predator in its area, is very important to keeping certain clams and mollusks and arthropods like crabs and lobsters. Helps to keep their numbers under control. The tide pool touch tank helps us to talk about changing water temperatures, because it is such a small body of water in these tide pools. Smaller bodies of water change a lot more quickly than large bodies. So some of these tide pool areas actually get impacted by climate change more quickly than the greater body of the ocean. The other thing about tide pools is that the animals that live there are very resilient. In the wild, tide pool animals are beaten by waves constantly. They live in this very traumatic area where the waves are constantly hitting them. So they're perfectly suited to having people touching them a little bit, and the animals do have opportunities to move into other areas if they don't want to participate. By introducing a touch tank to the aquarium, we're able to really capture people's attention. We're able to get them excited by making it a full sensory experience and giving people an opportunity to touch an animal and see an animal up close that they wouldn't be able to otherwise. The final zone in the Rivers to the Sea Gallery is the Gulf of California, and as it's connected to the Colorado River. The Colorado River rarely reaches the ocean anymore, and that does have an impact on the Gulf of California. There are species in the Gulf of California that are endemic, which means they're found nowhere else on the planet. One of the species in particular that a lot of people don't know about is the Vita forpus. The Vita is the world's smallest and most endangered cetacean, cetacean being dolphins and whales. There are less than 30 Vita left on the planet right now, and they are being impacted by poaching practices in the Gulf of California. The poaching is actually targeting a fish called the totoaba, where the people are catching the totoaba to get its swim bladder to use in traditional medicines overseas. The Vita is actually being caught as bycatch for this totoaba, which is also an endangered species. A lot of kids in particular get really excited about these pallet surgeonfish because of the movie Finding Nemo and Finding Dory. A lot of people call them doryfish, but they are actually pallet surgeonfish. They're really important for eating algae. They do a lot of algae grazing on the reefs to help keep the corals clean. The fox-faced rabbitfish are similar. They've got toxic spines, so the staff do have to be kind of careful when we're working in this aquarium to make sure we don't get stabbed by those rabbitfish. Another type of fish that we don't have on display right now, but are very important to the reefs, are parrotfish. Parrotfish are real similar to wrasses. We do have a moon wrasse in the aquarium here. But parrotfish are important because they eat corals, they eat algae, and as the parrotfish go through their digestive system, they process the corals into sand. And a lot of the sand that we have on beaches throughout the world are actually created and made by those parrotfish that live in the oceans eating the coral reefs. Thank you for joining me. I hope you learned something about the Marshall Islands, especially how we are connected here in Dubuque to places on the far side of the planet. Through our rivers, through our ocean currents, we're all connected, no matter how far away we live. I hope you visit the River Museum soon. We look forward to seeing you.